One family's tragedy could save another family, maybe even yours, the same pain.
Harvey Chernikoff, he died back in 2011 after he choked to death on a paratransit bus. His bus driver didn't know what to do to save him. Fast forward 9 years later to 2020, Harvey's law went into effect. It requires all paratransit drivers to be properly trained in first aid.
Fox 5's Les Crittenden recently spoke with Harvey's family about the law and how it's making a difference.
The person that was driving the bus was not trained in Heimlich maneuver or CPR.
Neil Chernikoff reflecting on the tragic day his brother Harvey choked to death on a Las Vegas First Transit paratransit bus back in July of 2011. Harvey was born with intellectual challenges and used the bus service to get around. On that day back in 2011, Harvey started choking while eating a sandwich. The driver of the bus didn't realize what was going on or how to handle the emergency until it was too late.
Harvey was slumped over his chair, almost to the floor, and how he missed it is beyond me.
Harvey's death led to a lawsuit. The family was awarded a settlement.
The entire litigation process lasted 9 years. So the court, all of the underlying was about 5 years, and the appeal process took about 4 years.
While the monetary amount awarded to the Chernikoffs was in the millions, the money wasn't their motivation. They wanted to make sure that what happened to Harvey would never happen again.
We're talking about the most vulnerable people in our community, and you would think at minimum that they would have first aid training, CPR, Heimlich maneuver, but even those basic things, they were just totally lacking.
Turned out during the trial, the family learned the driver's manual gave no direction to its drivers on what to do in the event of an emergency.
They had policies in their manual that addressed this training, but because there wasn't the requirement here in the state of Nevada, they took those pages out at a savings of about $40,000 on a $200 or $300 million contract. So it was all about saving a few dollars.
That did not sit well with the family. Elaine Chernikoff, her husband and surviving son, with the help of State Assemblyman Ozzie Fumo, got the Chernikoffs first in front of the Assembly to lobby for the law.
I thank you for having us here today.
And then before the Senate to get our state politicians to make sure our paratransport drivers could at least administer some form of aid in the event of an emergency. They succeeded. As of January 1st, 2020, Harvey's Law, AB 234, now requires paratransit bus drivers to learn CPR.
And with part of the monetary settlement, the Chernikoffs paid for the new Torah that was delivered to congregation near Tamid on Sunday.